this is James here with the Oracle Outlook for the week starting August the 12th, 2019. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining me for this week's video reading. I'm continuing to work with the weekly spread, which is a card layout that I've been using over the last few weeks, and I've been using it with different systems. This week I wanted to give it a go with Kipper, and specifically I'm working with Rupa Dudley's Kipper card. If you want to learn more about the deck, I will be leaving information in the description box below. So again, I'm working with Rupa Dudley's Kipper carton, and now that I've set things up, let's get to the table and take a closer look at both the weekly spread and the cards that are going to be making up this week's reading. And here we are with the cards on the table, and I'm going to take a few moments to shuffle the deck. And as I shuffle, I'm focusing on my usual intention for these weekly general readings, and that is for the information, for the insight, for the guidance and advice that's going to be most helpful and beneficial as we move through the upcoming week. Feeling one more time will be good. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut the deck. Now I'm going to fan the cards out. And I'm sticking with the weekly spread, so I'm looking for 7 cards in the fan that are getting my attention. And I see this one, this one, and this one. So that's 3. Over here for 4. And then 5. And we're looking for 2 more. Oh, and this one just jumped out. So we have 7 cards. I'm going to take the remainder of the deck up. Put that to one side. Now I'm going to take a moment to count back. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's just to make sure I actually did take 7 cards from the fan. And now, if you're new to seeing the weekly spread, each card represents one day in the week, and this is how it gets laid out. The first 3 cards go at the top, forming a row. And they represent the first 3 days in the week. Now, I read from Monday to Sunday, so for me, this is going to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Then the next card goes in the middle. This is Thursday, and it forms the heart of the layout or the reading. And this is why, because the final 3 cards go beneath card 4 in another row. And if the middle card is Thursday, then the final 3 cards, Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday for the weekend. And so I found this spread, as I've talked about in previous weeks. I found it in a tarot book, and so because I work with different cartomancy systems, for me I have taken that and kind of tweaked it and modified it. So what I do is, with decks like Kipper and Lenormand, I take the first 3 cards and consider what the overall message is. They may be speaking something overall for those specific days as a whole. Same thing for the bottom row. It might speak something as a message for the weekend as a whole. Then sometimes what I do is, if I'm feeling called, I may pair these 2 cards, and I may pair the last 2 cards, and then I may take into account the vertical column here in the middle. If the middle card represents the heart of the reading, or maybe the central issue or focus for the week, then these could tell us more about the focus or the central issue for the week if we read them as a column. So depending on what the cards are, I may feel inclined to employ some of those techniques. But if you want to work with the weekly spread and you work with Lenormand or Kipper or some other type of cartomancy system other than tarot, you may want to think about giving those techniques a try. Okay, so now let's take a look at the first card opening the reading up. Remember, this is going to represent Monday. And here we have house. So now here we have a situation where this could be something involving one's home life, one's personal life, right? House is a card that can represent home. It can represent family. So there may be something having to do with the family as a whole, or maybe a specific family member. It would be very interesting to see if any people cards show up, because they may be in relation to this card, right? It could also be a situation in which we have to consider, getting our metaphorical house in order, and that brings to mind what I talked about in last week's reading using the Tarot de Marseille and the Emperor card. Remember, that message was, what do we need to get in order? What kind of structure do we need to put in place? Do we need to be more disciplined? Right? And so there may be a carryover from last week with that message into this week, right? If we take into account that this card could be talking about getting our metaphorical houses in order, right? But house, in and of itself, can represent home, one's domestic life, domestic affairs, but also family and family members, right? It could be a situation that's close to home, or something that we have to live with, right? Because the house would be a space that we live in. And as I'm saying that part, it's making me feel like the house could also be about comfort. So there may be situations this week that arise that maybe test how comfortable we are. Right, so that's how I would look at house. So now let's take a look at the next card representing Tuesday. And here we have, so here we have one of the extra cards in the deck. This is one of the beautiful things I like about this particular Kipper deck, is that Rupa, the deck creator, made some extra cards. And so I went through the extra cards and decided which ones I wanted to keep and which ones I wanted to put aside, maybe for a future time, because in the moment they didn't speak to me as strongly as a card like Inspiration. So on Tuesday, this card is suggesting that we may be inspiration, to take some kind of action. And if I pair house with it, it may be something around our home, or again, something having to do with our family, or maybe even something having to do with a particular type of living situation. But there may be some inspiration, inspired to take some kind of action, right? Because usually inspiration comes before some kind of action, right? Now, it's very interesting if we go with the image. And so what I do is, with the extra cards, I give myself permission to really delve into the imagery. So here we have a woman who looks to me to be standing before a window. It looks to me like a window, right? And so she's looking out. So windows symbolically can represent our outlook, right? So it could just be that there may be some sort of inspiration that you gain as a result of a particular way of looking at something. So this could be about view or viewpoint or perspective. Or it could be that the inspiration is about a change in your outlook, like it leads to a change in your outlook. Right? So I'm looking at the image again, and I'm seeing a whole bunch of stars in the background. And as I'm looking, I notice that there is a shooting star, right? So the shooting star could represent, your hopes or your wishes. So there may be some sort of inspiration around a particular hope or wish. Right? And the message I'm getting with that is, maybe you've been hoping and wishing for something, and now it's about getting inspired to take action on that hope and wish. It's making me feel like we've moved beyond the hoping and wishing stage, and now we need to consider what kind of action can we take, right? And maybe we're waiting to receive some sort of guidance in the form of inspiration as to how we can bring that hope or wish into fruition, how we can see it fulfilled. So that's another way of looking at the inspiration card. And of course, how could we ignore the fact that there's a full moon on the card? So for some of us, this could suggest, being led and guided by our intuition. For me, the full moon is an intuitive or psychic symbol. And so we may get inspiration through an intuitive prompt. And intuition works through our feelings, so it could be a feeling. And so it just may be to honor your intuition this week. How can you honor it? How can you listen to it? And as I'm looking at the image again, the window could be open, let's say, right? And so a message could be being open and receptive to how your intuition speaks to you this week. Right? And if I bring house back into it, then the metaphorical meaning of house for me can represent our physical body, right? This is the housing, if you will, for our spirit, right? We are all spiritual beings having a human experience. And so house could represent our physical body. Why am I talking about that? Because our intuition for some of us could show up as physical sensations through our body, right? So some of us may get information of an intuitive nature through our physical sensations. So it's about paying attention to, your body's wisdom this week as well, because there may be an underlying intuitive urging or prompting through that means. Now, I talked about not just intuition, but being psychic. So the window and the full moon can represent your intuition speaking to you through clairvoyance, right? So this, for me, is a symbol that talks about people who see, people who have spiritual sight, second sight, inner sight, whatever you want to call that. So this could be the week where people, maybe if I go with the idea of House talking about comfort and comfort being tested, remember I said that, then this could just be about people becoming comfortable with their intuitive or psychic nature, their intuitive or psychic aspects. There is this idea that we are all intuitive, right? And so for some people, if that aspect of yourself is opening up, and it's a large window, which means that you are seeing more or experiencing more on that level, then it could just be, what could you do to be more comfortable or become more comfortable with this aspect of yourself, especially if it's opening up. Right? Part of the word inspiration is in spirit, right? So this could just be a nod or a prompting to consider your intuitive psychic nature. How does that speak to you? Are you being led and guided to be more open and receptive to that? Honoring it, paying attention to it, or developing it, right? And if that is too woo-woo for you, then you could ask yourself, what am I inspired to take action on this week? Tuesday may be the day where that inspiration comes, right? And you could choose to be like the woman in the picture. Are you going to be a spectator? Or are you going to be more active and be a participant in making that hope or wish that's connected to the inspiration happen? So that's inspiration. So now let's take a look at the next card. And here we have, okay, so here we have abundance. So now, one of the things that I talked about, if we're talking about getting our house in order, so to speak, remember, house being the first card, or something having to do with family or a family member, then abundance can represent financial increase, right? And so now it could be a situation that starts off on Monday that leads to us wanting to gain a sense of inspiration as to how we can um, add more value to our lives, right? So if it's not money in the literal sense, because this card can be about financial increase, then this card could just be about adding more value, right? Abundance usually is a card that can mean a lot of something, right? So it could just be a matter of, again, being inspired to add more value in your life. Now, of course, it could be also being inspired to create a greater sense of abundance, right? And if that's the case, then one of the things that you could do from a spiritual perspective is to look at the ways, that's a woman looking out the window, huh? Look at the ways in which your life is already abundant, meaning your house, right? How are you already abundant? And as you express that, as you become aware of that and take gratitude in that, that leads to increase, right? There's a spiritual principle that what we focus on, we increase, we get more of, right? And so let's just say maybe that you're feeling inspired to add more value to your life, you know, increase your bottom line, become more prosperous. But it starts with recognizing how abundant you are already. Right, so for some of us that may require a shift in focus. Remember, the very first thing I said about the inspiration card was about a change in outlook, right? So for some of us, it may be around money and prosperity. And so that would suggest possibly how can you change your outlook if you need to, right? So again, abundance is about financial increase. It's about wealth, prosperity, abundance, but adding more value to one's life or adding more value to whatever the experience, if there's a particular experience. Now remember, I talked about house representing your home life, but also family or family member. So if a family member is involved in a situation, then it could be maybe that person needs to, you know, um, consider ways that they can create financial increase, right? Or, you know, it could just be a person hits you up for money. I mean, that could be it too, right? But that is how I would look at the abundance card, right? It's about adding more value to one's life. So now let's take a look at the card that's in the middle of the layout this week, representing Thursday or the heart of the matter. This card shows up every single time I work with this deck. So if you're no stranger to these videos and you've been following along, then you know that the leisure card represents, for me, downtime. It represents relaxation. So on Thursday, or at the heart of the matter, it could be how can we maybe, if we've been putting a lot of work and effort into maybe getting our metaphorical houses in order like we did last week, you know, maybe the flip side of this is at some point in the week, maybe we're just being asked to take a break, right? How can we create more downtime? How can we create more leisure time? Those kinds of things, right? And as I'm looking at the card, this is another one of those extra cards like inspiration. But one of the things that's getting my attention with this card right now is the clock in the background. So there's something on Thursday or at the heart of the reading as a whole that has to do with timing, right? So there's no mistaking that this card is below inspiration. So it could just be a matter of that idea about being inspired to take action. There may be something having to do with timing or timetables or scheduling around that. Sticking with the clock, right? Now, if we're talking about getting something in order, I'm noticing that the teacup is on a stack of books. So this could literally represent, I'm just going to go with the obvious, that there may be somebody who needs to kind of take a look at the books on their shelves and either A, get them in order, or maybe take a look at the books that they're not reading that are just piling up. Right, I recently organized one of my book areas in my house, so it's making me kind of think of that. But there may be, for some of us, if you're a book collector like me, at this point in my existence, I always talk about when it comes to books, I have more books right now than I probably have time, the clock in the background, to read, right? But I love having books. But it could just be a matter of either A, sitting down and picking up a book that you've been meaning to get to and read, and so Thursday might be the day to do that, or that you're taking a look at the things that are piling up and maybe needing to kind of sort through them, sift through them, see what you want to hold on to, see what you want to release. It's reminding me of what I talked about last week with the idea about feng shui, right? And that would just be clearing out. But the books could just represent not books in and of themselves. I mean, they could represent books in a literal sense, but it could just anything that we might be letting pile up. This may be the week to kind of go through that, right? And people are saying when you have some downtime, right? Sticking with the leisure aspect of the card. Right, so I'm seeing that now. I will say this. I talked about with inspiration in the full moon in the window about, being clairvoyant, or, getting more in touch with our intuition, our psychic nature. The books on the card could represent this idea about being a reader, right? Because you read books. So somebody may be feeling the urge, the prompting or the leading. If you are an intuitive or psychic person, you may be encouraged here to read for other people, right? I'm looking at the books and I'm thinking about how we read books to children, right? Or that you go to a bookstore and there may be an author there who's doing a reading, a reading of his or her book. But I'm taking that more to the intuitive psychic slant and saying reading for other people. And again, you would say when? I'm saying the leisure aspect of the card would make me feel like, you're doing that in your downtime, right? You may be doing that from home or when you're home, like when you're home from your 9 to 5, your day job, or whatever your main gig is, right? It's making me feel like this would be something you might do in your downtime, away from whatever that main gig is. And with abundance coming before that, you may actually be finding yourself doing a lot of that. Remember, one of the meanings of abundance is a lot of something. So it could be for somebody, you may be doing so well that you may be having readings that are piling up, right? Now, I just got this. This is just an interesting turn of events, or a segue, or a tangent. But I'm looking at the teacup, and I'm looking at the house card, and it's making me feel like this idea about maybe someone coming over and having tea. But I'm also thinking about that expression, spilling the tea. So I don't know if that means like somebody's story. Remember, the books on the card represent works of fiction, if I can get the word out correctly. So it's making me feel like there's going to be some tea spilled around some story that somebody's been telling. And I'm looking at the clock in the background, and when that story or those stories come out, it's just a matter of time is what it's making me feel like. The clock in the background is making me feel like it's just a matter of time. Ooh, I did not expect that one to come out, but there it is. And so that is leisure at the heart of the reading this week. So now let's take a look at the card that represents Friday, moving into the weekend. So here we have, okay, so here we have thoughts. So the thoughts card represents thinking and planning. So it could be as the week, the work week, for those who work Monday through Friday, as the work week comes to an end, this card could suggest the obvious would be thinking and planning about what you're going to do for the weekend, right? That's what's coming to me in the moment. But if we go with the idea that this is connected to inspiration, because if I lay the card down, you can see that thought knights to inspiration, right? So it could be like if you are inspired to take some kind of action, you may be thinking and planning on that. Giving the action or the action that you are inspired to take some thought and then planning it out. How am I going to do it? What do I need to do it? Those kinds of things. But thought is really about giving something some kind of thought. Now, I also tend to look at this card as a meditation and contemplation card. So if a person is wanting to develop his or her intuitive or psychic ability, then this card, again, knighting to inspiration, could be asking you to consider meditating, right? And that would make sense with leisure coming before that. So it could just be a matter of planning when you can make that happen. You may be saying, I am too busy to meditate. I don't know when or how that's going to happen with my lifestyle, house, how I live my life. I don't know how that's going to happen, right? The only way it's going to happen is if you make plans for it to happen, right? So again, I'm going to go back to the clock and leisure. You have to be willing to make time for it, right? And with the time, it doesn't need to be a whole lot of time if you're starting out. You could start with small increments of time, and as time goes on, and that pun was intended, you could build on that and you could add more time. I remember when I started meditating, I started with 10 minutes at a time, and then I built my time up to 15, and then I went from 15 to 20. And then I felt, it's very funny I'm sharing this, but I was inspired by my angels to up my time from 20 minutes to 30 minutes. And so right now I'm at 35. And I'm sharing this again because this just happened to me earlier last week, is that I had a dream and I was telling somebody about my guides. It was very interesting because I don't normally dream about my guides, but in the dream, I was telling somebody about my connection with my guides because the person was fascinated and wanted to know about it. And so I was emphatic in the dream to this person about meditating. And I told the person in the dream, you need to be meditating for like an hour a day, right? And right now I'm at 35 minutes. So when I woke up from the dream, I thought, oh my goodness, are my guides asking me to start meditating for an hour a day? And so I'm saying what I just said prior to about busy lives. That was my first response in terms of my thought. My thought was like, how am I going to meditate for an hour a day when I have this going on and that to do and so forth and so on, right? So I'm not just saying what I said for those of you who are watching. I'm saying it for myself as well, right? Just because I'm the reader doesn't mean that the messages that I'm talking about don't apply to me, right? But, so all that to say is that if you're wanting to work with your intuitive ability, if you want to work with, now that I mentioned it, developing a stronger connection to your angels and guides, and that would be, again, the woman looking out of the window, right, at the stars, right? So those could be representative of angelic beings, light bodies, those kinds of things. Even I know people who believe that they have ETs as their guides, right? So any of those things, right? But if you're wanting to form any kind of connection, how are you going to make that happen? How can you find the time or make the time to allow yourself those moments of stillness, right? So that was very woo-woo about this card, but bringing it back down to earth, so to speak, this card is really just about thinking and planning. And what I love about this image is that the man has a light bulb going off above his head, right? So this could also be a day where we receive some kind of enlightenment, where the light bulb goes off. If I knight this card back to inspiration, remember, the change in outlook can come from receiving some kind of an idea, right? Something that prompts that sparks that. So here we have a man with the light bulb going off. So this is about receiving an idea, an aha, an epiphany, some kind of illumination, enlightenment, all those kinds of things, right? But the core meaning of this card is about thinking, planning, analyzing something, maybe doing some kind of research. Again, that would be a nice way to bring the books on leisure back into this. The idea about reading up on something, right? Again, with the whole idea is like, maybe doing this in your downtime or your quote unquote leisure time. Right? So that is thoughts. So now let's take a look at the next card. And here we have child. So child is a card that can represent something having to do with children. And isn't this funny? Because I said earlier on that it would be interesting to see what kind of people cards show up in relation to house. So going with that, there may be a situation, since we talk about house and family, there may be something having to do with either a child in the family or the baby of the family. So if there's a number of children, this could be the youngest of the children, right? So there is that aspect. So a child could literally represent a child or a baby. Now, if you're like me and you don't have any children, for me, my go-to meaning for this card represents something new, something beginning, something starting up, right? So if we go with the idea that house is talking about our home life, our domestic affairs, then this could be something new on the home front, right? If we connect this card to house. It could also be, again, for those who I talked about all the metaphysical things about intuition and psychic development and connection to guides and angels. Then this could be maybe that development is in its stage of infancy, right? Or, I talked about, in one respect, a person who may be becoming more open and receptive, maybe is at the stage in their development where, they're having a whole lot of readings coming in, they're starting to read for the public, those kinds of things. This is the flip side. There may be somebody who is just starting out, right? They're the beginner, they're the novice, right? They don't have a whole lot of experience. That's all child, right? If that is you, if that resonates with you, here's what I want to offer to you. Find fun and creative ways to develop, right? Because the child card is all about having a playful attitude, having a sense of fun with the whole development process, right? And I'm going to offer this. Don't compare yourself to people that you believe to be further down the road than you, or a belief that you have about people being more developed, right? More advanced. Don't do that to yourself. Honor where you are in your development. If you're just starting out, be okay with that. Right? And if you're the person where I talked about how can you become more comfortable with your intuitive or psychic nature and you're wanting to develop that, then this card is asking you to start small. The child would represent small things. So what is the one small way that you could begin your developmental process, moving it beyond its infancy, right? It's making me feel like, if this is a baby and we're talking about the developmental stages of a baby, how can you get maybe from crawling to walking, right? Taking those first steps. And if you're at that stage where you're taking your first steps, how can you get to being more of a toddler where you're zipping around the house, right? So that's how I would look at child. So again, child can represent something having to do with a child or the baby in the family, or something that's new, beginning, and starting, right? Something new, beginning, or starting in your life, right? And it could also be, if I lay the child card down next to thought, it could be a new idea, right? A new way of thinking, You know, it could be plans with a child or the start of a plan. You know, or if we're doing research, then this could just be doing a little bit of research. All right, so now let's take a look at the final card. Rounding things out, we have, ooh, things just really changed here. So here we have the agony card. And if you read with a traditional Kipper deck, this could be known as grief and adversity, right? So sometimes this card can represent, with the name like grief and adversity, this could be, you know, about facing a challenge and overcoming the challenge, right? This could represent difficulties. And what do we need to do to overcome them? One of the meanings I have for this card is stress, right? You can clearly see by the expression on her face. How expressive is that, by the way, right? But you could see by the expression on her face that there is some sort of stressful moment, right? She's had a moment where she just needs to scream, right? So it could be by the week's end, there may be something having to do with a situation being presented to us that is rather stressful. And again, it reminds me of what I talked about a couple of weeks ago with the Gypsy Witch cards, right? With the mice card about stress, right? And how do we choose to handle our stressors, right? The things that produce stress responses, right? And again, if we're dealing with a situation that is really stressful, this card also ignites inspiration. And what did I say the chief message of that card was? About a change in our outlook. So it could just be a matter of changing how you choose to react and respond to those kinds of stressors, right? Looking at the situation in a way that changes how you respond and react to it. Right? Now, as I put this card down, what I notice in the moment is that this card is paired with abundance. So remember, I talked about whatever this card is connected to, it talks about a lot of. So there may be a lot of stress that we're dealing with, or there's stress around a financial situation. And remember, one of the meanings that I talked about was financial increase, or maybe a family member, baby of the family, who might be needing some financial assistance and we're stressed out about that, or that the person in question is stressed out about it, right? We've been giving the situation so much thought that it's stressing us out, right? We're trying to think of a plan to kind of combat that. So that is what I'm seeing with this card. You know, it's about, you know, thinking, maybe overthinking something, over analyzing a situation so much so that it's beginning to cause stress, right? And if that's the case, if that resonates, then it's again coming back to maybe we need to calm down. You know, the leisure card is calm down, you know, relax. You know, I'm feeling inclined to say breathe. The first thing you need to do is breathe, right? And then how can you change your outlook on the situation, right? So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and end there. This has been the Oracle Outlook with James and Mitchell. I am so thankful that you shared this space and time with me, going back to leisure. And I'm looking forward to sharing the same space and time with you at a later point for our next video reading together. So until then, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day, and I'm hoping that you have a wonderful week. One that is not too stressful. Take care.